Okay, now we're going to go over the summary. It starts out at the beginning of the epic with the assembly of the fallen angels. They're already in hell. And they begin building Pandemonium, which is, like he said, their palace or fortress in hell. And then they debate about the war. Like he said, Beelzebub is the one who suggests going to Earth to see about Adam and Eve. And Satan volunteers to be the one to do this. So he leaves hell, and on his way out at the gates, he meets sin and death. And at this point, death tries to kill him, and sin stops them from fighting, and explains to Satan that she is his daughter, because Satan actually doesn't remember her. And she also explains that death is the son of sin and Satan together. So after that, God foresees the sin of man, and at this point his son volunteers to sacrifice himself for mankind. Satan finds Uriel, like I said, the angel of the sun, and disguises himself as a good angel and tricks Uriel into telling him where Earth is. So he gets to Earth, he sees Adam and Eve, and he becomes very envious of them. And he overhears them talking about the tree of knowledge. Now Uriel has realized that it was not Satan, or that it was Satan, and goes to warn Gabriel that Satan is in the Garden of Eden. So Gabriel sends out 2 angels to try to find him. And they find Satan whispering in Eve's ear, disguised as a toad, while Eve is sleeping. So they bring Satan to Gabriel, and Gabriel banishes him from the garden. At this point, God sends down Raphael to warn Adam and Eve about Satan. So he does this. He starts out by telling about Lucifer and how he became envious of the Son of God. And so he decided to rebel because he wanted the power. So he put together all of the other rebelling angels, and they had a war. The first 2 days, Michael led the good angels, and Satan led the other rebelling angels. And like I said, Abdiel was the only one who stayed faithful to God, who was under Satan's command. And then on the 3rd day, God sent his son to end the war. And he did, and he sent all of the rebelling angels into hell.
Raphael continues with the story of creation. God wanted to create a new race to replace the rebelling angels and to signify that his kingdom would go on without end. God sends his son then to create the earth, and it proceeds much like the story in Genesis. In 6 days the earth is created, and it also includes a warning to the humans not to eat from the tree of knowledge. At this point in the telling of the story, Eve leaves the conversation because she prefers to hear about it from Adam. Adam then asks Raphael about the motion of the stars, and then Adam goes on to explain his own creation. He describes waking up one day and wondering who he was and all those other questions that you ask late at night. Then Adam realizes that he can walk, jump, run, and speak, and then suddenly God appears and explains to Adam all that he needs to know. He explains that to not eat from the tree, the fruit of the tree of knowledge, and he also allows Adam to name all of the animals. But despite having all the animals around, Adam still longs for companionship. So to meet this need, God puts Adam into a deep sleep and creates Eve from one of Adam's ribs. At this point, Raphael injects into the story and says women are weak, and they must be are weaker than men because they actually come from men. And because of this, men must overcome them and overcome their physical attractiveness. There's no bitterness in Mr. Milton at this point. After this conversation, Satan comes back. He comes over the wall back into paradise, and he chooses the serpent as the shape to take. Satan is envious because he believes earth is more beautiful than heaven, and Adam and Eve are getting the run of paradise. The next morning, Adam and Eve wake, and they set about their chores. Eve wants to do their chores separately, but Adam thinks this might not be a good idea because Satan may be able to tempt them. But Adam eventually relents, and they go off their separate ways. Sure enough, Satan finds Eve, and he starts to flatter her. Eve says, "How can this be? This serpent, this snake, this animal is speaking to me." The serpent says, "Well, I received my gift of speech by eating of the fruit of the tree of knowledge." But Eve says, "No, this can't be, because God said anyone who eats from the fruit of the tree of knowledge would die." Satan says, "No, God forbid it, because he wants to show you how to be independent." But this, Eve starts to think. well, if God said that you'll die and this serpent isn't dead, then this must mean that by eating the fruit of the tree of knowledge, I'll just gain more knowledge and become like God. So Eve decides to eat, and she does eat from the fruit of the tree of knowledge. And with that, mankind falls. Eve then goes off to find Adam and implores him to eat. Adam knows that this can only doom them, but he goes ahead and eats because, well, he can't stand to spend life without Eve. And with that knowledge, Adam begins to look lustfully at Eve, and they go off into the forest and make whoopee. After making whoopee, they go to sleep and they awake and see earth in a cold new way. They realize that they have lost the knowledge of good and have only gained the knowledge of evil. And they are ashamed because they are naked, so they work to cover themselves. They argue for hours about who's to blame. Meanwhile, back in heaven, God knows what has happened. Gabriel and the other angels go back to heaven and said, I don't know what happened. God says, that's all right. I allowed this to happen. I knew it was going to happen, but I do not condone what happened. With that, God then sends the Son down to judge Adam and Eve. The Son asks Adam and Eve, have you eaten from the fruit? Which they confirm. Once this happens, the Son then punishes the serpent, forcing him to crawl on their belly, forcing the serpents to crawl on their bellies for all time. Eve and other women will now be stricken with labor pains, and they must now submit to their husbands. Adam and all men from that point forward must now hunt and farm for food. The easy life is over. Meanwhile, back in hell, sin and death wait for Satan, and they sense that he has accomplished his goal. So they finish the bridge between hell and earth, and they then meet Satan, which they start slapping each other on the back, saying, hey, good job, way to do it. And from that point forward, sin and death then go on to infect the earth. Sin will infect men by attacking their minds, and death will attack men by attacking their physical bodies. Satan then goes back to pandemonium, and he's thinking he's going to get rapturous applause, but instead all he gets is hisses because all of the demons have been turned into snakes. The angels, back on earth, the angels then start to make seasons, and they cause discord among the animals, causing them to fight. Adam is sorrowful because he knows that, well, he really screwed up. And he starts to blame Eve. Eve begs for forgiveness and says only through unity and love can we be saved. So both Adam and Eve go back to the place where they were judged and they ask for forgiveness. God hears this and decides that later he'll send his Son down to save mankind. But at this time, God sends Michael down to escort the pair out of the Garden of Eden. Michael arrives and he tells them the news. Adam is distraught because he believes he can no longer speak to God. But Michael says you can always speak to God. With that, Michael puts Eve to sleep and he shows Adam the future. Michael shows Adam Cain and Abel, disease, death, and war. He shows men and women dancing, playing, and doing and living for pleasure, yet evil things. He shows great armies, and he shows Adam Noah and the people who will come after Noah. He shows Adam the Tower of Babel and how mankind's arrogance led to new languages. Michael shows Adam the story of Israel and Abraham and Moses, and he concludes with the story of Jesus and how he was sent to earth to pay for man's sins, his death and resurrection. But Michael also reminds Adam that after the first followers of Jesus died, corrupt leaders will come in and will control the church, which is a not so subtle dig at the Catholic Church. And the story concludes at the second coming and how Jesus comes back to resurrect both the heaven and the earth. Adam realizes at this point the good that will come from his sin. Adam realizes that because of the sin that he and Eve committed, mankind will ultimately be redeemed. With that, Michael sends the pair out, and Michael begins to stand watch with a flaming sword over the Garden of Eden. And that's the end of the story.